was the code word for it. There it is. So that's my first venture into GUI design, graphical user interface, UX design, user experience. And this is the original design concept for a series of sample libraries I did with Spitfire called Albion. And this is back in the day when it was called Blitzkrieg. I spoke to a German friend of mine and I said, Blitzkrieg, good word, bad word? And he said, Christian, very bad word. So we changed it to Albion. But I think I wrote a little note to the guy who, Blake, who did the original GUI. Here's some bits for you to start building the interface, some ideas of how they should look, be skinned. Also encloses a screen concept, which gives you a rough idea of look. I think my hope is not to do any 3D looking knobs and faders, that it's all pretty 2D, almost like a diagram of a machine that you alter and hear the sound change in real time. I don't think we ever really achieved that idea of a moving diagram. The Snakes of Russia VENOM thing is me returning back to that concept. I've always had a funny relationship with skew morph. There's always something a little bit Harley Davidson, middle-aged man trying to shag his PA about it. A little bit kind of distressed jeans. But I've also found that the 2D thing can be incredibly, well, not particularly welcoming. It gives a kind of flat experience. I guess the second venture into GUI design, I was so pleased with, I actually got a tattoo of. And basically I came up with the wireframe concept for this thing that became Labs. I'm a massive admirer of brutalist and minimalist design, big fan of Dieter Rams, and just analysed what it was that I was doing with the interfaces, reducing that down to the absolutely bare minimum. We got up to 3 million users. Which is why I tattooed it on my arm, because it was something I was proud of. With Crow Hill, I think it's far better to let actions do the talking and to limit the amount of fluff of smoke and mirrors that's required in order for people to understand something. And something that I grew up with was a grandfather who was a carpenter, and the reason why Spitfire was called Spitfire is because he patched them during the Second World War, converted passenger planes to Dakotas and back again. So he was really into industrial design, really showed us the beauty in function over form and how you can draw focus into certain objects in order to intuit what it is that these things do or the things that you should interact with. It's not about brand identity. It's about cohesion in experience across the board. And having run Crow Hill for about a year and a bit now, I'm much clearer on our journey moving forward. And I want that to be consistent across everything that we do. So it's not just the GUI, it's the letterhead we use. It's not just the user manual, it's the fonts that we use, say, for example, on these videos and all of that stuff. So everything ties together and feels familiar. And I also have the kind of realism to understand that people don't use our stuff all of the time. And if you've got hundreds and hundreds of plugins, having a learning curve of any sort on a plugin really, I think, is very off-putting. And that's not the point. We want to make stuff that people enjoy using and use a lot, get a return on their investment. So I asked the team if I could have a go at the GUI for Snakes of Russia. And this is the story about that. So something that we started with was a mood board. This is us getting a bunch of imagery, both from Joseph, Snakes of Russia, and by looking at the stuff that he's been putting out, interpreting it, stuff that we've watched. I love getting into this creative process because it tunes you in to certain things, and it's I think they call it the Biedermeinhof phenomenon, where suddenly you'll hear something, a word for the first time, and suddenly you hear it everywhere. And it's just that basically we filter a lot out, and suddenly when you suddenly think of, I don't know, black letter, Gothic lettering, suddenly you see it everywhere, and you let that in, you let all of that influence in. So there's me doing some rather silly teaser stuff, but this is a good example of an actual Snakes of Russia flyer that we found, and how, is this one of my favourite artists, just absolutely stunning, how that informed a bit of direction, the occult, but also looking at these images, which I believe are like ninja stars as well. Things that are most interesting about a GUI, and they're not that interesting, is circles moving around and finding a way in which we could illustrate a circle moving around in a way that was engaging but not necessarily skeuomorphic, and skeuomorphism is 3D or pseudo 3D. We did end up with some stuff, but it was just, let's see if we can go for something that is flat, go back to that original Albion plan of, 14, 15 years ago, a diagram that you move that changes the operation of the machine that the diagram is illustrating. And then talking of the Biedermeinhof phenomenon, a friend of mine who's a fantastic artist, he's linked below, his name's Shane Bradford, and I've known him since I was very young, since I was about 13. He was a drummer in the band I was in. He's a fantastic visual artist. I've linked his site down below. If you've got any spare cash, go and buy some. And I'm hoping to buy one of these particular paintings because of the inspiration it served on this GUI. So if we have a look at his painting here, it was just great. You know, the mind is open. It's defiltered to black letter, Gothic, bats, ninja stars, but also interesting circles. And I found this very interesting indeed. So I did some experiments, and I did this in Premiere Pro. That in itself served as real inspiration, because whilst the look of it is quite rough and raw and it looks printed, what I found was that when you scrub it backwards and forwards, it has the feel of almost like a Swiss watch. So this set me on a new personal brief, which was imagine a Swiss watch designed by Iggy Pop. What you'll see here is the original wireframe by Cam. So this is something that he discussed with Snakes, with Joseph, and said, okay, what we need is these controls. It needs to do this. So something I set about doing was thinking about these different controls, different circles doing different stuff, combining it with these ninja star type ideas. The reason for the ninja stars is not because we wanted to take people's eyes out with this, but what's nice about them is they're circular in design, but they have pointers as well. So instead of just being normal dials, and started coming up with these ideas here. And then also started thinking about, well, instead of skeuomorph, what about giving a sense of connection between the dial and its operation? So I did a little animation test, and that's just kind of hand animated within Premiere Pro. And there's just a bit of physics there, bounces, springs back. And I don't have experience of animation, it's just trial or error. So got this concept signed off by the team, who seemed to like it. That was a dial based on Shane's original stuff. And then set to work thinking about tying the different elements together. So this concept of Iggy Pop dial, ninja stars, Gothic, this, that, and the other. And thought, well, wouldn't it be great to create some kind of logo, some kind of moniker for Snakes of Russia? And I went down the stupidly obvious route. This doesn't represent Russia at all. It's the Soviet flag. Nicked a couple of snakes off the internet. And then just at every step of the way, before I start spending too much time on things, just start proving the concept to myself, and then did basically on my iPad hand drawing of that. So I came up with these outlines, which actually I really like that. I think that's kind of quite cool. And then started working on breaking it down into a vector form. Now, for those of you who are staunch musicians, there's two types of graphics. There's vector graphics and there's bitmap. The way I see it is vector graphics are basically the MIDI of art. Bitmap is the audio. So within WAV files, you have MP3s and different compression rates and that affect the quality of the digital rendition, which is a series of ones and O's. Bitmap is basically something that tells your computer to put a pixel of this kind of color luminosity at this point X and Y. Vector graphics is a series of instructions that tell your computer to draw something. So draw a line that starts here, from there, here, has a curve here, and which has a radius of this, etc., etc. So really, really similar to MIDI. So these are the vector versions, and what you'll notice about something like vector is that you can change the color of it, because all it's doing is going, make those lines red. It's not going, make this pixel red, make this pixel red, make this pixel red. So it's not something you do in Photoshop. And I'm using Figma here. So I thought the idea of any political emblems as probably being worth avoiding, particularly as this is a political symbol, not a national one. So decided instead to go for a bear. What I did is ask Alison whether she could do us a whole toolkit of hand-drawn, hand-painted circles, lines, this kind of stuff. And it's interesting how by hand, eventually something like that is not going to be great, because when you rotate it, it looks a bit wibbly wobbly woo. It's interesting, you can just have a look at a bunch of splodges like this and go, oh, what appeals, that appeals to me. There's something incredibly organic about it. There's something slightly kind of horticultural, and I quite like this because it looks almost like a finger joint. So there's that slightly anthropomorphic connection to it, whilst there's also something horticultural. And I think it was working with this image and creating some dials that allowed me to play more on the horticultural idea. And we'd been looking for an alternative word to warp or morph or mangle, which is, I think, overused these days, because there was going to be a lot of modulated and processed sounds, and came up with the concept of poisons and applying different poisons, which is where you'll see a horticultural theme becomes a lot more apparent. But basically, what I then set to doing was creating a series of assets from all of these different elements. And it was interesting because no matter how true the circles looked, when you rotated them, they're a bit bumpy. So in a funny way, I can't remember what I used. Yes, I used this, duplicated it loads of times to create this scrub layer, and used that as a mask for true circles. The center of that circle is pretty true, but it still looks a bit wobbly. And what I found is when I tried to put them into concentric circles, I found that they really lost that well-crafted feel of the Swiss watch. So development of the GUI, and instead of having an A and a B like we did before, we basically have a bunch of different kits and then a bunch of different poisons, and then these different macros here. One of my strange ADHD obsessions when I was younger was doing calligraphy. So if we go back to the playpen, you'll see that I actually hand did that calligraphy here. And what I hated about the name Snakes is it has an S in. So I had to really practice my S's because they are notoriously difficult to do. It was actually the K that ended winding me up towards the end of the process. And what I found, if I can find it, is that I did quite a good S early on. Again, created some vector versions of that and messed around with that S. That's actually Joseph's beard in there texturally. So here are the vector versions of that calligraphy. This just looks rubbish to me, and you'll see that I struggled with it a lot. But the thing about vector is you could just zoom in indefinitely because the computer's not going, put a pixel there. It's a line, make a line, regardless of what the magnification is. And the other thing I did is I took some of these lines that Dot had drawn and also my favourite little knuckly flower thing and created, instead of using numbers, dashes or little dots, I thought I'd never seen on a GUI tally before. So just wanted to do a little test of that. And this was the next development. I felt that this looked like I'd just thrown a bunch of toys onto a tray and had arranged them. There didn't seem to be any interaction between them. And then looking at this, I thought, ooh, there's just something that's really nice about the way that these linear objects here are interacting or integrating with the circle there. So I followed suit with these here, which again looked okay, but again, there's just something slightly unconnected about it. I'll also show you another, this is the Mr. Knuckles here. I came up with this animation idea of these little clasps here catching this as it rotated around. I was scared that it looks like a floppy willy, but I don't think it does. And I did a little animation of that. Yeah, so that's Mr. Knuckles there doing the organic thing that I was talking about. That's what I was playing with. And it was that animation that inspired the poison idea. So it's interesting to see how these things inform each other. Yeah, this is the animation. So that's Mr. Knuckles there, little blob there. And the idea is that I would animate it with the big dial. So what we've got is a bunch of just different concentric circles. And again, probably should have done this in After Effects or something like that, but I don't know how to use it. So I was just using Premiere Pro, which I do know how to use. So just different circles going at different speeds. What I quite enjoy is this mechanism here. There's quite a lot of layers though. And you'll see all of this pattern here that's rotating with, that's part of that scrub patterner that I described earlier. And then I think we lost this fading thing. And then I just decided to animate Mr. Knuckles separately there. And started getting a lot more adventurous with what I was working on there, using the red. And I think this was the final version of the dial. And I think I flipped it 180 degrees for the final rendering. So this is one I had a lot of fun with. And if we just go back to the original design file, you'll see this is one of the things that I actually animated by hand. So instead of just getting some shapes and moving them around the screen in Premiere Pro and changing and stuff, making things disappear and appear, this I actually animated by hand, or rather within Figma. The slackening of the pulley that's pulling the envelope, something slightly Edward Heath about it. It's really silly. But why not have a bit of humour in your GUI? Quite late in the day, I was sprung with a second page which has a lot more knobs on it. I used quite a lot of the assets that we developed for the previous page, but made sure that things were asymmetrical. Here, there's a poisonous flower here. The thing I'm really proud of is using some of my illumination techniques to create quite rough-looking vines that interact with each other. So there's a lot of detail in there. And that's Mr. Knuckles again up there, somewhat straightened out for the VU meter there. That's just off the corner of one of my bits of calligraphy. And then you'll see that that then becomes almost like the logo for the library there. And this is the point at which we've got this circular thing around there. And this is also the point I start getting feedback from Cam, talking about practicalities. So we didn't have the browsers up or the VU meters up in these corners. They were elsewhere. And his argument was, let's put them where people are used to them. So it's a bit of a give and take scenario. We want it to be intuitive, but we don't want it to be annoying. And the last bit of the jigsaw was this thing here, the VENOM knob. And I went through a few iterations there, if we have a look at, but ended up with something I'm just really, really pleased with. And what's lovely about this was this stemmed from some marketing materials that the content team were playing. So this is the whole thing about working together in real life, in the real place together, is everyone is bouncing ideas off each other. And I think this actual, and I think it's like Deadly Nightshade or something like that. This, I think, is the crowning glory. This, for me, is a disruptive thing to put into a GUI, a plant. So whilst I was developing the idea for the VENOM knob, I was also wanting to do a few teasers. So we started, at the point I was working on the VENOM knob, we still had the hammer and sickle. Moved to these. When you go like that, you just don't know what it is. This was what I settled for, which was St. Basil's Cathedral with some snakes. Even tried a little thing of Joseph there. And these were the animation assets that I put out there for that. And let's have a look at what that looked like. I really liked it. And I showed it to the team and they really liked it. But again, this is something you've got to let your ego drain away. Does it just look a little bit Harley Davidson, middle-aged man, distressed jeans, highlights in his hair, trying to shag his PA? And that I lived with for about 2 or 3 days, and just eventually it was this gift here that it was Jack that found that downstairs. That I thought, oh, hang on, there's something that I can really do with that. So you've got bitmaps, which are put this pixel here, and then you've got vectors, which is draw this line here, and sprites are basically a group of vectors or pixels, and basically the computer's going, move that whole group, do something with it. So if we go to like the big dial that we were looking at before, these black marks are, because it's a black background, they're the kind of scrub that goes over the top. So basically what happens is a sprite sheet, I believe, is that whole thing there. And because MIDI has 128 steps, there'll be 128 sprites in there. And basically what you do is you export the entire sprite sheet. And the thing to look out for is not having massive gaps between the sprites, because the computer has to deal with those as well, which is fine in these circumstances because they're 2D without shadows and stuff like that. Here's the little floppy willy. And actually, if you see, so it's not only going up and down, it's moving down. So this is referred to as the wallpaper. So this is the background. Nothing changes on this. I know, because this was my first time, that we're going to have to revisit a lot. So basically what I started with was a key. You've got these individual numbers for these individual different bits, but say something like that is all 8. So this is repeated across the lot. And then what happens is we've got the corresponding number there, a little note that there's one instance, and then the position in relative to the GUI. Now, something that we decided to do with the VENOM button was this, which isn't straightforward. And considering this is my first GUI that I've done to this stage, it was definitely a case of overcomplicating stuff. So what we're actually doing is we're changing the wallpaper, but the problem with that was that these ones with the black fronts on, let's see if I can just drag one over so you can see what I mean, looked very unsightly on the black background. They just looked filthy. So what I then had to do was separate those 2 layers, here and here. And likewise, these are basically a black mask. Because it's a black background, we found that when it went red, they didn't look very good. So we had to do red masks for everything as well. And it took quite a lot of coding to get that right. But it's not just the knobs. It's stuff like these little navigation things. When you press them, they're meant to look depressed. So you've got to do that as well. That'll be a very small sprite. You'll see the tallies here somewhere. Where are they? So very simple, just 11 different sprites. The VU meters, we've got our little cute flowers here. Again, when you press them, they go in. And again, it's amazing how much, even though you're just switching pictures, it's amazing how much the brain makes you convinced that that thing has actually gone in, even though it's 2D. This is the wallpaper for the second screen, and these are just like surrounds. Finally, in preparation for reading the user manual, something that Cam provides along with his wireframe is a little guide to what all of these different things do. And because he had done this chart according to the wireframe, I had kind of mixed up the order of stuff to get it aesthetically pleasing. So I just wanted to double check that everything was corresponding to the correct thing. And it's a real big high because, I've been sitting in front of plugins for 20, 25 years, something like that. And to actually have a part in that is a lot of fun. So we've got our little flowers that go in and out. And then we've got our little kind of spermy plants, which inspired the poison. This is quite cute because that goes a bit like that. This is the clasp one. And then if we go back to the first thing, you'll see, if I just try and do this as smoothly as possible, this will stop in the middle. Like there's a kind of a notch in there. And everyone's favourite bit, the tally. But that's it forward, the little wiggly woggly there. And then we've got my favourite bit, slower at the beginning, and then it zips past, and then we go right up, and it just gets brighter. And then, and so what's happened there is that all of these sprites, the minute I hit that, are being swapped to the ones with the red masks there. And you'll see the little cutout of the VENOM there. And let's do that. That's so satisfying. I'm a great believer in how things make you feel. It's not just about how things sound or the theoretical thinking behind the music that you're making. It's the environment that you're working in, the feedback that you get, and how that, oh, look at that. There they are. The VUs up there. Yeah, it's the feedback that you're given, whether it be with your ears, with the feel of the actual instrument as you interact with it with a controller, and then you've got this visual feedback as well, which makes you think differently about stuff. It's all about the experience that we're given. Just a little bit like when you're playing with a band, not just with your computer. You'll get a vibe off something that will, I think, affect the way in which you create your art or your craft. You can go to sites that create these knobs for you, and you can buy knobs that are on stock companies and stuff. But it is that thing of just being mindful that not everything moves, particularly with particular surfaces. So if I was to have a shadow, say, there, and that followed it all around, but there's just something about it that would cease being so realistic, or so just something that's just not quite right about it, but not in a great way. So that's my first GUI. And if you go to the website crowhill.com, we're in the process of re-liverying, reskinning and updating pretty much all of our library. And what I thought I'd do, for the sake of transparency, is put our workings out up there as things develop. So you'll see, if, say, for example, you're a Volts user, which is our free plugin, you'll see some very early days rough designs for that. It's a route that we're not going down, and I'm really pleased with the route that we are going down. But also, Snakes of Russia, it's a phenomenal drum library. And it was funny, my brother rang me up. I had sent him a copy, and he was a successful composer from an act called The Flight. And he said, Christian, it's great, sounds great, but I don't know what any of the knobs do. And I replied quite simply, they fuck with the sound.